Welcome again to Mass Timber March Madness. We're privileged to have Thomas Robinson of Lever Architecture here to take you through a presentation. Take it away, Thomas.
Thank you, Greg. It's great to be here and be able to speak with this group of individuals that are really pushing the limits of mass timber. And what I'm going to talk about today is really the relationship between architecture and mass timber. I'll talk for about 30-40 minutes and then have plenty of time for questions. But I think just a little bit about Lever. We are a 35-person firm based in Portland, Oregon. We're just over 10 years old, so we've kind of grown up in the last 5 years with the development of mass timber in the United States. But I think this is our office that I'm in. You can sort of see behind me the space. And when this was built, it was the first domestically fabricated cross-laminated timber office building in the United States. And that was a really exciting opportunity for us to really work in material that is literally right outside our window. So, you know, the panel you see hanging in the air is grown in the range you see in the distance 3 hours south, fabricated and then shipped to Portland, where we assembled this building almost 4 years ago. And that connection between you know, the kind of explosive growth we're seeing in cities and rural economic development is something that's really important to people in the Northwest, and I think is a big driver. And when we think about mass timber, that's even sometimes bigger than the technical aspects. And I think for me, when I think about timber, it always sort of starts with the forests. And you know, the forests in many ways are a big important element to the future and the future of some of the biggest challenges we face as a society relative to climate change, relative to rural-urban equity issues that I think we see in politics today, and I think, you know, relative to carbon sequestration. And I think connecting the decisions we make around mass timber to sustainably managed forests and really thinking about how mass timber thought of in a wider context, in a global context, can really address some of the biggest issues that we face here relative to forest fires and thinking about more sustainable management. And this is something that I've experienced, you know, very personally, and not being able to go outside in Portland for 5 days because the air quality is just so terrible. And you know, this year actually, you know, I've been given a number of lectures, and it's really the 5-year anniversary of the U.S. Tall Building Competition, which was a competition we won with a great team called Framework. And that was really an opportunity to really push the limit of what's possible in terms of the code, to do a performance-based design example, which we actually had permitted to show that you can build tall in the United States with timber. And I think amongst a huge team and a huge effort, a lot of the work and testing that came out of that has been incorporated into the IBC. And, you know, this is something that's now spreading across the US. I think one of the other things that was really important for us for Framework was really thinking about, this is a project that's funded by public and private partnerships. Like, how do we push the boundaries? And one of the things specific to the West Coast was thinking about resilient design in timber. So we developed a whole technology, which we're still involved with right now. We're actually going to be doing another test next year, so it's 5 years later, to do post-tension resilient self-centering structures out of wood, because wood has a great, very high strength to weight ratio, and actually is a great way to address this issue in a major seismic zone. And you know, lastly, just that idea of a more virtuous cycle relative to thinking about forests, fabrication, construction. And I think one of the big focuses that we've had lately is really thinking about the connection between mass timber and equity. And as this sort of, at this particular time is really key. And I'll sort of talk about that in one of the projects that I'm going to be going through. But I think, you know, for those of you that aren't in the US, I think it's really important to understand the context of timber in the US. So I just, in terms of where we've been, you know, I've worked in Europe for a number of years and you know, encountered sort of the difference between the two. And actually, you know, my mother's European, so I have that kind of connection there. But the U.S. timber tradition is quite, it's quite different in that it's really focused on balloon framing, timber framing, and our entire supply chain is basically built around this way of building. Starting in the 1830s, so we almost have almost 200 years of tradition, and in a way, refinement of the supply chain relative to stick framing. And so it's very hard to kind of compete against a stick frame structure using mass timber. It's actually kind of a different animal entirely. But I think in the Northwest, in Portland, it's a really a newer place, and at the within the last 100 years, we've had old growth timber, and so there was a different tradition, almost a massive timber tradition. This is an example. In 1905, in the Pan Pacific Exposition in Portland, they built this building called the Forestry Center. You can see those logs. Each of them is over 50,000 pounds, built with pulleys. An amazing structure. Unfortunately, it burned down in the 70s with an electrical fire. But I think that tradition and that kind of connection to wood is, for me, on a personal level, really related to the fact that, as I was growing up, I spent a lot of time at my great-grandfather's house, who was a scientist, and he built this residence out of timber, and completely out of timber. And it was only like a couple years ago that I found out, this is actually sitting on the East Coast of the United States, that he had actually purchased 2 boxcars of Oregon ponderosa pine, shipped them across the country, and had 2 Irish carpenters in Cape Cod put this house together. But that house and the experience of it, the experience of timber, the connection, for me, you could still see the fingerprints of the carpenters on the ceiling and the walls, was really something that I think motivated us as we got into doing these buildings. And in the last really 5 to 6 years, Lever's done, I'd say 8 or 9 timber buildings. They're not all purely mass timber. They're always in a way hybrids, and that experience is something that is really key. And so I wanted to step through some of the projects that we're involved with that are a variety of different uses of timber. And this is one that we've just completed about a year ago, which is really restoring one of those sort of timber frame, stick frame buildings. These are 100-foot spans. These are 2 warehouses in Portland, about 60,000 square feet total, so around 6,000 square meters. And I think what was fascinating to us is like the kind of structures that you see in these buildings are really not necessarily achievable with the current code in terms of their lightness, in terms of their efficiencies. So it was an opportunity to really restore and put together this factory complex that was built completely based on efficiencies to manufacture hay balers during World War II. And when this building had been filled up with all types of mezzanines and things over its life cycle, over 60 years of work, and we pulled out, as we sort of stripped away all the layers, over 5,000 linear feet of virgin 4x12 timbers and more. And we thought, well, could we use that timber in a way to sort of rebuild a connection between these 2 structures? So as we sort of took the thing apart, we thought, well, could we then take that timber, we had so much of it, we could use it for the columns, the floors, and then actually remanufacture it on site. So we actually worked with our fabricators to actually create what's called a screw laminated timber structure, simple mix and hybrid of one new solid piece connecting and bridging the other pieces together. And so you can sort of see this bridge connector, which is both contemporary and but also sort of ancient. This is old growth wood that is being respected, and we put it all together. It had been painted white and black, and then we sandblasted it all in one place, just like we've done with the old buildings, but this is a completely new structure. So some images of that, and then some views of this connected. So for us, that kind of idea of restoration, and it was really great to hear, that idea of you can do really incredible architecture within the context of existing buildings if you can rethink them. And I think there's so many timber buildings that have that opportunity. And that's something that we personally, and I'm incredibly excited to explore. And we're doing that in a number of projects. But this project, Red Fox Commons, is for us something that's both contemporary, but an opportunity to actually preserve these really phenomenal historic structures. So you can sort of see the truss structure. I mean, one of the key things that we did from a design point of view is really restore. We added these clear story skylights, north light. We added a mezzanine that's engineered on the lower level out of mass timber, and then kind of reworked the structure seismically with the new fenestration. So it was a complete, like literally you saw the image of just the structure. We're completely then reimagining the entire experience of these buildings. So I feel like that building, Red Fox, is sort of working within that stick frame tradition. And then I think about like, where are we going today? I mean, we've done, you know, the building you see behind me, this is our office, which was one of the first CLT buildings in an urban city in the United States. But now we're really focused on sort of the next generation of buildings. And one is for the Oregon Conservation Center. And it's really the headquarters for the Nature Conservancy in Oregon. And they had an existing building, which is actually the building you see in the back. And they wanted to create a convening space for, you know, bringing people together to talk about preserving these landscapes within Oregon. So the Nature Conservancy is the largest nonprofit, I think, in the world, private nonprofit focused on conservation of landscapes. They employ primarily scientists to really look at solutions to major issues, both locally, regionally, and globally. And they wanted a building that embodied their values. And a lot of that had to do with just preserving this existing building, which actually happened to be near where I live. And I'd probably passed by it 1,000 times. And I'd always thought it was maybe an insurance office, but I had no idea that it was the headquarters of this major environmental organization or land preservation organization. So they wanted to preserve that building and reimagine it. And it actually happened to be a timber building, and then add on a convening center, which is actually, you know, a cross-laminated timber structure where they can actually bring people together. So as part of that, they were also looking at how they could actually use material sourced from their land to actually build the structure. And so this is one of the first buildings in Portland where we're sourcing specifically, you know, FSC certified timber from a forest and then tracking it all the way through in terms of construction. And that also played out in the facade and the landscape, that we were looking to be very, very targeted about how we could tell the story with the building. So these are some of the images of that convening space being structured. We were looking at using domestic 7-ply CLT to span that space. We had limited floor-to-floor heights. And then on top of that is actually a roof deck planted with seedlings that come from sort of their landscape. So some of that you can sort of see the cantilevered CLT and then the overall building as it stands. So a huge amount of work done to sort of rework the structure, but you know, you can kind of get a sense of the scale. And you know, putting big, huge green roofs on top of cross-laminated timber is something that, you know, we've been able to do and work through, and, you know, be sure that, you know, we have really robust waterproofing, and we're thinking about expansion and all those types of things. So that's a really big part of any kind of endeavor that's a little bit innovative, is to really understand where you need to work technically on the details. So some of the views of that building. And one of the things that we're always looking for in every project, and I think this is what it means to be an architect, is to think like, what's the thing you can innovate on that actually creates a more richer experience for the inhabitants. And in this building, one of the things that we were excited to do, and I know this has been done in other parts in Europe, but was to really think about, could we use this wood window wall? We did that here, this wood window wall that's sourced originally in Oregon. Could we use it structurally? So in the case here, the mullions are actually supporting the 15-foot cantilever of the CLT. It's a structural element that you couldn't do if this was an aluminum system, or it would be more difficult. So there's that integrated approach and thinking about how to sort of work with that structurally. Also on the Nature Conservancy, we talked about sourcing and the connection between sourcing and landscape. And in this case, we sourced juniper for the facade. So juniper is a native tree to Oregon, but through fire suppression, it's actually gone wild, and it sucks up a huge amount of groundwater, which threatens the habitats of wildlife in Eastern Oregon. So working with Sustainability Northwest and nonprofits in Portland, they've been looking to find markets for juniper. So we worked with them to actually do a juniper facade for this structure. And the amount of wood we sourced actually saved over 700,000 gallons a year out of the Eastern Oregon landscapes. And they were telling me, like, after they've harvested some of the juniper springs that hadn't been present in a generation, started to return, and then that started to sort of support wildlife. So juniper, you know, is a very it's a very durable wood. They make fence posts that last hundreds of years, but it's also pretty gnarly, as you saw from the picture. So you really need to know what you're doing and thinking about the attachment. It's not just something you can do without sort of consultation with people. And I apologize if there's noise. We have a construction site right outside our door here. People just keep building. Adidas North America is a project we're just completing. You know, we just got the final photographs, and if you're in Portland, you can just drive right by it. It's quite a incredible project for us, and it's I think taking that idea of regional mass timber to scale, and really thinking about hybrid structures. So it's really two buildings. You can see the north building on the right and the south building on the left, sitting on top. The south building sits on top of an existing parking garage, and the north building has a 600 space, 5-story parking garage underneath it. And one of the key things that Adidas was looking for was to build this quickly and to build it economically. We won this project as a result of a competition. And at the time, you know, there was an interest in mass timber, but it wasn't in any way decided that that's what they wanted to do. And as going through a series of studies, we came up with a system, two systems. On the north building, we came up with a hybrid system of precast structure, of columns and girders, and then what we call a CLT and glulam cassette that fits into it. And on the south building, because it's sitting on top of an existing parking garage, it's an all CLT and glulam structure that's lighter. So you can sort of see here the section. The gray is the existing parking. On the right there is this new glulam and CLT building that's basically planted on the columns of the existing garage. And then on the left is the hybrid precast and CLT structure sitting on top of an all precast parking garage. And so images to explain how that works. And one of the things that came out of it is, you know, we were able to actually accelerate the construction of this project by over 3 months by prefabricating all these elements, including the structure of the parking garage. And I think one of the things that we came to is by, you know, working, you know, with our contractor Turner and the structural engineer at KPFF and the fabricators, we were able to come up with, I think, a system that we haven't seen before, where we're doing a traditional precast girder plank and column structure for the parking. And then when we got out of the ground, we said, well, could we generate and develop a custom girder that's perforated so it would allow us to run utilities through the structure and maintain this really honest and simple system. So you can sort of see this is the kind of classic parking garage system with these big planks that's below grade. And then when we get up above, this is sort of what we have, this very sort of straightforward system where you have these perforated large girders, the precast columns, these are, and then these, what we call double T CLT, or actually CLT double Ts, if you know the precast double Ts they use for parking garage. So these become assembled on trucks, we stack them 4 high, and then we're putting them together in kind of a ballet where we're working with the precast erectors and then also the wood cassette. So in 2 months, we were able to assemble 180,000 square feet of core and shell structure. So it really, really fast, and it was done during the winter. So very, Turner did an amazing plan looking at moisture management. We had a whole protocol about that because we were basically doing this, and dealing with rain and all those things and understanding, how we could do the pour. So you can sort of see here also the ability that we had with these systems to actually cantilever 15 feet with the precast. So then we could actually sit the CLT onto those pieces. We were also, not just thinking about this precast prefabricated system for the structure, but also thinking about a prefabricated facade system. So these are some of the early mock-ups, and thinking about how we could use the same element and then reverse it to really play up the sort of subtleties of the material, the color, and the light. And for us, this really resonated with Adidas brand. Adidas, I think, has a real focus on materiality and the sort of subtle treatment of materials to create interest and richness. And this facade, you can sort of see an in progress photo of it. It's all the same panel, it's all the same window, but then it's assembled in a way that gives it life. And I think that sort of extra dimension of materiality that wood brings, and then the sort of honesty of its assembly, is something that we, as architects, is something that's really important for our own work. And then, I think other inspirations for us, this is the South building, which is about 35,000 square foot building, and it's really a gym, a cafe, and a roof deck. And because it's sitting on an existing park garage, there's a different system. We had, a BRB core that was erected in a couple days, and then this very sort of straightforward stacking, almost Jenga-like system for the structure. And one of the things that over the years we've gotten interested is how sort of simple can we make the details and the connection, because we found, the complexity of these details is really what drives a lot of cost and drives a lot of complexity. And we were interested in thinking about, in a way, eliminating the need for steel or the need for these elements in the structure. And so in this case, we developed this building where actually, if you go back one, you can sort of see the only steel connecting these elements is this steel pinion up here, and then everything else is stacking. And you can see this is what's almost complete: the gym, the structure, and then one of the inspirations for me was utilitarian structures, wood utilitarian structures in Japan. I went there. My daughter studied Japanese, and so I spent some time with, and she was doing the exchange there. And the thing that fascinated me was obviously the tall timber pagodas, but the buildings that I really loved were these utilitarian structures. On the left is a granary that's, I think, 800-900 years old, and just this simple stacking of how those pieces go together. On the right is the scaffolding that supports the palaces in Kyoto. And they were obviously looking at doing what is the sort of simplest system, because it's so huge. And that's something that was an inspiration for us relative to this connection, which is just a steel pin and then these elements that come together. And we're actually using bearing screws that you can see here to get the fire rating and the coverage. And then these elements just pin together. So these beams are just sort of hoisted and then basically pushed on one side or the other and then screwed in. And then the other elements are stacked. And that stacking allows us to actually run mechanical. So it's, a very straightforward system. There's a lot of timber in this building. So it's, in a way, choosing more fiber over complexity. And probably the state of where we're at with the manufacturing supply chain in the United States, that's probably not a bad choice at this point. I think that's changing rapidly as we have more folks coming online who have the capabilities to do more complex connections. So I'm going to talk about Meyer Memorial Trust, which is another project that just finished up. And Meyer Memorial Trust is the largest sort of private foundation in Oregon, really focused on equity. And they're located, they were located in downtown Portland, and they relocated to North Portland, which is historically the Black community in the city that was basically decimated through urban redevelopment. And they're really rerouting their organization to really focus on that community. And they wanted, materials that came from all over Oregon and really connected the state. And one of the things that we're interested in exploring is the new material called mass plywood coming out of Lyons, Oregon. And you can sort of see the convening space that we created here is actually made completely, and the kind of pre-function space on this ground floor is made completely out of mass plywood. So I talked about the mullions in the Nature Conservancy. This is really the entire structure and mullion system. So we're able to you know, prefabricate all these elements off-site. And you know, this is Frere's facility in Lyons, which is literally an hour and a half south of Oregon, where they're making these mass plywood products. And then the sort of main space where you can see we're using it for the columns, the beams, and the roof. So it just comes together as, and then that's connected to a new landscape that looks back in downtown city. This is right at the freeway. So very straightforward detailing, but really expression of the materials. And these columns also on the exterior become the mullion system. And you can sort of see that here. So that's, you know, this sort of collaboration and using this product really came out of work that we've done with Frere's. We did a number of pavilions, early work, I think almost 4 years ago, just exploring the potential of their product even before it was put into any building. So that idea of connection, idea of really thinking about building a building that actually empowers people that aren't necessarily represented in timber. I mean, over 40% of the contractors in this project were minority woman-owned businesses, and over 23% of the design consultants that we use were also what we call COVID in Oregon. So that issue of equity in mass timber, I think, is something that is really important to us. It's important, I think, to the future of a more inclusive approach to thinking about building. And we have an opportunity right now where these technologies are developing to really include more voices in the conversation. So I'm going to talk about two projects that are kind of at different sides of the coins. This is Spring Street in Los Angeles. It just was permitted and started construction. And we think it's one of the first buildings in Los Angeles where a major 150,000 square foot building where we're using cross-laminated timber for the floor systems. I mean, LA is a big city. It's really complex to print, to do work there and permit there. But it also is an amazing place that I have a personal connection to. I'm actually from California originally, but I now live in Oregon. And one of my favorite buildings in LA is the Bradbury Building. You might have been familiar with this building from the Blade Runner series. But what's fascinating about it is the experience that I didn't think of. It's basically this incredible wood structure. And it's wood and cast iron, and then these beautiful black cast iron columns. And we were thinking of ways we could think about that structure. And then this is maybe 45 minutes from my house, Oneonta Gorge, outside of Portland. And thinking about how we could maybe bring landscape into a steel and mass timber system. So this is the site. This is actually the Chinatown Metro stop. So it's like literally right next to this new phenomenal infrastructure that LA's been building. But it's also in a kind of mid-zone between, I would say, like the downtown and the suburban. So there's sort of middle ground. And that's also interesting to us. And because when you think about high rises, sometimes you think about roof decks, suburbs, sort of this green landscapes. And what is that middle ground? And this is pre-COVID. And we're thinking, well, could you bring landscape into every level of this structure? And that's sort of what we focused on. And we worked with James Corner Field Operations to really think about how the landscape can kind of be woven through the building at all levels, so that it's a place like LA where you have this really amazing climate, could leverage that climate to actually create these outdoor spaces. And so we created this very sort of straightforward, you know, outdoor stacked garden with circulation, and then these buildings off of it. Now it's actually sitting on an existing garage, so we're actually piercing that with the steel, and then we're using the cross-laminated timber for the floors. So some of the systems that we're looking at, and you know, one of the key things for us is really understanding very early on, these are schematic design level studies of how the systems are being distributed in the building. We need to design those sort of in concert with the building in order to ensure that people are actually able to experience this timber without conduit and ducts running everywhere. And I think that is really for us critical to have that integrated approach. And it really comes out of my background when I worked in Switzerland for a number of years working at Herzog. It was really doing museum work. So really thinking about all the systems in an integrated way. So the last project I'm going to hit on is a competition that we participated, international competition for the Anthony Timberland Center at the University of Arkansas. And it was a really exciting opportunity to compete with a number of world-class firms, but also explore some of the ideas about regional timber that we've focused on in the Northwest in a completely new environment. This is in Arkansas. And what's fascinating about Arkansas is it's about 65% forest, which is quite similar in a way to Oregon. It's not something I think I thought of, you know, and that was sort of my bad, not really understanding that. But also they have this rural tradition of building out of wood, incredible barns. This is actually on the upper left, the oldest wood building in Arkansas, not old by European standards, but, you know, I think it was from 1850. But this sort of shotgun house experience, and then these amazingly efficient, simple barn structures you could see there on the left, and then these grain silos that sort of dot the landscape. But I think maybe people aren't as familiar that Arkansas also has an incredible contemporary architectural pedigree. Fay Jones built this building, which is called Thorncrown Chapel. It's right outside it's right close to the University of Arkansas in Fayetteville. And incredible structure, but it's built out of 2x6s. You know, they're connected in an incredibly thoughtful and simple way. And that idea of, you know, taking timber framing, and I would almost say this is like the high Gothic of the US tradition of timber framing, and thinking about what does that mean for the future and what does that mean for mass timber. So we were really interested in thinking about looking at regional sourcing for southern yellow pine, and we came up with a scheme where we're thinking about those traditions with Fay Jones to do a building. And I've neglected to mention the program. It's basically an innovation center for the architecture school focused on new materials, primarily timber, and think about how we could build using stock glulam that's actually currently manufactured in Arkansas, and create a space that evokes that that tradition, but also brings something more to sort of the way that you think about a fabrication space. And you know, I won't spend too much time on this, but one of the inspirations for us was to think about the fact that in architecture school, oftentimes the shop is sort of relegated to the basement or isn't necessarily part of the heart of the school. And we wanted to think about making that fabrication halls in a way a place of making that really connects all the studios, the labs, the auditorium, and we designed that around this fabrication hall where the spaces actually look down into it. So the whole structure that you see here was actually made out of stock glulam elements. So we actually started with the suite of stock glulam products that were available, and we put together the structure, you know, with that in mind, and also looked at using, you know, glulam for the floors. Talked with a local fabricator in Tennessee. Sort of the way we're thinking. It's in a way we're starting almost like a chef with the ingredients, and we're not being governed by that. But I think using that as the starting point for us is always a really exciting journey and really informs the way we think about design. So this is a really wonderful opportunity for us. Unfortunately, we didn't win, but it feels okay, because the winners were the Pritzker Prize winners of last year. So we wish them luck. And it was a really exciting opportunity to explore a lot of ideas that we continue to sort of work on subsequent projects. So something we were also working on, ideas about an integrated approach to net zero in the building in terms of the shape and the form and the orientation with solar and the facade. And we really looked at all these pieces as a whole. And these are just some of the key diagrams. We had the opportunity to collaborate with Transolar, with Thomas Auer, to think about what it would mean to truly do a net zero or climate positive timber structure. And these are some of the sort of technologies that we developed in terms of using geothermal, using this main atrium space as in a way, an area where we could actually, it's almost like the lungs of the structure and the building as a whole, to create a building that can work in this in a way almost tropical environment and have different mixed modes. So that was a really exciting opportunity for us to kind of develop, I would say, ideas that we're continuing to explore in current work that we're involved with all across the West Coast and the United States. So I want to end, this was a pavilion. This is the first major structure that we're aware of built out of mass timber sourced from Oregon in the United States. It was part of an exhibit for an architect named John Yam that we designed a number of years ago. And he was a real pioneer of Northwest architecture. And I think that idea of understanding, and actually in the 30s, he was one of the first architects to use plywood for affordable housing. It's not incredibly well known, but I think that continuity, that connection to sort of local innovation and materiality is something that we think is incredibly relevant and important when you're thinking about global solutions to, you know, some of the biggest challenges we face collectively. And I think that our work is really, both very much about this place, the Northwest, but is also very much about trying to create models that can be used elsewhere to really think about how to build more sustainably, how to build in a way that addresses systemic issues around equity. And I think that's something that inspires us in every day. I'm just going to end with this quick quote: "Think well to the end, begin with the end in mind," Leonardo da Vinci. What does that mean? For us, it means that, instead of a linear process, you're really thinking, what is the end goal? What is the sort of result that you want from the place that you're making? And how does that relate to people's needs? And that you can sort of think of those in parallel and then actually come to something that people, when they actually come to the building, when they experience it, they can really sort of physically understand some of the key sort of issues that we're trying to address as architects and as human beings. So thank you. So I'm gonna, Greg, do you think I should stop sharing? Is that easier? So I'm gonna just read some of the questions that I heard here. Let me just stop sharing here. So who have requested the building you've designed, private, government, or others? Most of our projects are private, actually, initially. I mean, it's a little bit different. When I lived in Switzerland, there's lots of competitions, but in the case of the United States, it's in a way more open, but also a little bit more random. So, some of the first projects we did were for a developer who was working for the Pacific Northwest College of Art, building student housing. If you go to our website, you'll see some of those projects. So those are some of the clients. And then lately, we've definitely had the opportunity to do more institutional projects. So with the Nature Conservancy, with Meyer Memorial Trust, but there's also different models, and we're competing now, for sort of projects for the University of Washington. A lot of our work has been with the creative office. So those types of things. Just looking here at some of the other questions. Let's see. With all the new mass timber products coming into the marketplace, which one do you know to choose when you're designing your structure? Surely you can't come up with many different designs specific to each product, determine which system comes in the most economical, or is economics even considered? I would say, economics are one of the first things that we need to consider. I mean, this building had no sort of governmental support. It was a completely speculative project done by the owner. So we built this timber building, this CLT and mass timber building for around $200 a square foot about 4 years ago. So each decision was calibrated relative to the cost of the building to actually make it work financially. So I think the key thing in terms of how you might answer that is, you know, really keeping your options open with, you know, and that thinking about, in our case, early in the sort of looking at framework, we were saying, okay, we need to be able to think about the capabilities of multiple manufacturers, and, you know, and then design in a way that allows us to be a little bit flexible, that we're not just locked into one manufacturer and one product. I think that idea of flexibility is super important, especially when we have this very sort of young supply chain. I mean, when you go to other, I would say, when you go to other places like Europe, you might have like 17, 20 plus manufacturers of a particular product with capabilities to actually do the machining you need to do. In the United States, that's not necessarily the case. There are, you know, contractors that are starting to sort of, in a way, just do the complex machining and then utilize glulam manufacturers in, say, the Northwest that don't have that CNC machining, but have been making glue lamps for like 60 years and have an incredible amount of knowledge. So let me just see. Let's see. Jerry Calera asks, was the winning structure also designed with mass timber? Did they say why your design was not chosen or why the winning design was chosen over yours? I think assuming you're talking about the Anthony Timberland Center. I mean, there was a jury, there were multiple juries. It was a really complex process. You know, I think it's like any kind of competition. It's hard to comment on, you know, why somebody won and somebody didn't. I mean, we're really proud of the scheme we did, and we're excited. You know, that Grafton's going to be probably delivering a great project as well. So, you know, it's just one of those things where, yeah, we love our design and we would love to build it, but we're going to work, you know, on other projects, and we're going to take some of those ideas forward. There's another question in here. Let me just see here. What are the reasons why people request wooden buildings? Sustainability, to show off, economy, aesthetics, others? That's a good question, actually. I think you know, I think it depends. It's very regional, I think, in some ways. I would say in Portland in the Northwest, you know, most of our buildings are made out of timber. Many of them are made out of what you would say mass timber, and they've been built out of that, you know, and some of them are quite large, and they were built in turn of the century to the 20s, you know, so we have that type of building, and people actually value those types of spaces, these sort of older warehouse buildings that have been converted to office. But, you know, we only have a sort of fixed amount. And I think a lot of the drive has been like, hey, I'd like to be in, you know, a timber building, but I'd also like it to perform acoustically. I'd like it to be more sustainable. You know, I'd like to have, you know, up-to-date fire systems, and also for it to be up-to-date relative to seismic. So I think, at least in our market, that's what's driven a lot of it. And I think it's also just the fact that it connects to, you know, the forests of the state. I mean, Oregon, you know, we have great wine here, but we also have one of the best places in the world to grow Douglas fir, and its native habitat is actually, you know, in Southern Oregon. So we have this amazing resource that we can tap into and leverage into nice buildings. So I think that's really an important piece of it. So Ho Jung-ri, hi Thomas, thank you so much for the wonderful lecture. I'm curious, beyond the current limitations of building codes and mass timber, what would be your dream project that you would want to build out of timber? Well, for me, I love building buildings for the public. I love building buildings that contribute to the city fabric in a meaningful way. I mean, you know, I've always loved libraries. I've loved spaces with books. So for me, probably a dream project is to do, in a way, buildings that are civic in nature that really connect to people's everyday lives. I think, so a library would be, in a way, a dream. But I think every building can contribute to the civic fabric, whether it's public or private. It's really about the sort of attitudes of the team. I mean, we know when we work with developers that a building has to make economic sense, but if we can really be targeted about making economic sense, then we can bring another dimension to it. And I think that's what we've tried to do. Even on projects that are just simply retail or student housing, we're always thinking, what is the sort of civic component to it? And that civic component could be just the way, you know, the street presence. It can have different dimensions, like it could be about regionally sourcing the material. It can be about, once you get into it, it has this warmth of experience. I think, I don't think that those aspirations are incompatible with financial considerations. I think it's just being open to that, those pieces of it. Curious what happens to all the submissions that didn't win these competitions. Do firms use them for other pitches, or are they just archived? You know, I'm sure that, you know, we sometimes will show the Arkansas project as, you know, as an exploration. I think it's valuable for us. You know, of course, you know, everything you do, I think sometimes leads to something else, even if you don't know it until that next thing appears. I mean, we wouldn't be doing the Adidas project, which is a almost 500,000 square foot project, without our sort of experience with framework and Albina Yard. So, you know, there's always that imprint of the study and the exploration you did that sometimes shows up in the next project or the next exploration. Let's see. I think I've answered all the questions. And let's see if I have any others here. So I won't, I can open it up to other questions. Otherwise, I really appreciate people spending the time. I'll if anyone wants to ask another question, I'm happy to do that. I have a little bit of time. If that's good, well, thanks everyone. I really appreciate the opportunity to speak with you about our work. Oh, let's see here. There's another, oh, here's another chat. What were the panels on Adidas? They're actually a composite Alucobond type material, folded. What we did is we were able to do very tall 12-inch panels. You know, and I think that that's really was something that was really interesting to us. Here, I'm looking at the chat as opposed to the questions. Can you speak in the way, so Zach Moreland, can you speak in the way you've worked with trades on projects that may not have had prior experience with mass timber materials? For example, what did the precast trade on Adidas that did the erection of the CLT decks? That's really, I give a huge amount of credit to Turner. They were actually, they worked with the unions to actually have the steel erectors do the timber. And so, because we had to kind of do it sequentially, so we did the precast erection and then the timber came in. And you know, the timber, these are huge elements there. And once they got the hang of it, it was fine, and they were able to really do it incredibly well. And I think it was exciting for them to do something a bit new. Let's see here. Yeah, I think that if there's not any other questions, I will, close it out. Thank you for your comments and for spending time. If you want more information, please visit our website. There's a great article on Meyer that just came out in Architectural Record. There's a great issue on civic architecture, and Meyer's part of that. So if you want more information on Meyer, I'd encourage you to take a look at that articles, and also beautiful photographs by Jeremy Bitterman on there. So thank you, everyone. And Greg, I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you. That was amazing buildings. I hope we can see a building like your Anthony Timberland or the Arkansas building constructed somewhere in Oregon as a mass timber innovation hub. That's my dream.
Yeah, I mean, I think we'd love to build that building. And we priced, Greg, you should know, we priced this timber structure for that. And I think it was 1.7 million or something just for the timber delivered to site, all machined. We actually got a price for it. Mm-hmm. And so it's, you know, they had a really tight budget they were looking at. So we were really interested in that kind of almost over the top realism. I think that's interesting to us. Like if you can think about design that's radical and real at the same time, that gets us really excited, or gets me really excited, as opposed to sort of speculating about future technologies. That we're really interested in what can we deliver, you know, in 2 years. And then I think that delivery actually then in a way catapults people to say, hey, I could do that. And I think in a way, I think that's what this building has done to a small extent, is that it gave people the opportunity to like, wow, it's a CLT building in Portland made out of domestic material. And it's really nice. And, you know, and they can just sort of walk in it. And I think, you know, we've had probably, I don't know, 1,000+ people or more visit this building. You just show up occasionally. We just like, oh, hey, I'm in town. Just wanted to come by. So anyways, but Greg, thank you for, you know, time. I don't know if you have any questions. I have a little bit of time.
Yeah, what do you, I think the audience, rather than my questions, let's see if there's any more coming in. Did you see the one from Frank Weeks at the end?
Oh yeah, wondering what digital tools you employ in your office. Is there anything that helps with mass timber beyond the usual Revit or Rhino? You know, it's funny, maybe I'm showing my age a little bit, is that when we first started Lever, I mean, Lever's now, it's a pretty young firm for, I guess, US standards. I mean, we're 11 years old now. And, you know, we started in my basement, you know, classic. And then I couldn't stand anymore. So I had to rent a cubicle in architect's office. And then we went from there. But to answer your question, is we started really, we work a lot in SketchUp actually initially. And I think one of the things that's great about SketchUp, at least initially, was that it didn't necessarily have all the complexity that Rhino has. And I used Rhino when I was in school in 2000 when it just came out. And so we work a lot in SketchUp. And what's interesting about the SketchUp system is the component system that you can use, and that's very much aligned with how timber buildings get built. And I think even the way we think about architecture is that we're in a way creating components, and then that almost like the DNA of the building, and then you're basically you know, using that DNA to sort of generate different forms. So yes, we do use Revit, and for a long time we didn't actually use Revit. We used Vectorworks. And it's only in projects like Adidas, which has a 1,000-page set, where we, you know, transitioned to using Revit. But I think one of the key things, Revit to me is more like it's like a tool, and I'm a little wary about getting into Revit too soon, because it's almost like once you're in the tool, it's hard to extricate yourself, and it's hard to maybe move things around. And I think that's changing, but I think it's important to have the flexibility to create many options quickly that maybe aren't so precise, so that you can explore the idea before you commit and then really get into the documentation. But you know, I mean, we have people that use Revit in an amazing way, and now with these plugins that you can use like Tally that really kind of inform things like embodying carbon and stuff, and things that you can do quickly. Obviously, that's gonna become more and more a big piece of it. So, well, with that, I'll get back to the sunshine here. I think I'm gonna go get some tacos in the food cart down the street. There's an amazing taco cart like 2 blocks away. So I'm gonna since I'm in the office today, I'm gonna hang out there.
Yeah, thank you, Thomas. And one last thing is I'll still keep approaching you, hoping that we can find enough impact investors and crowdfunders to build a version of your Arkansas building somewhere in Oregon.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's find them. I mean, we've got the pricing, we've got the engineering. We could build it in 3 months.
I'm ready to go. I'm serious about that proposal. We obviously know quite a few crowdfunders and impact investors. So
yeah, no, I mean, yeah, it'd be an amazing structure, and it's you know, obviously you're not going to do exactly that, but I think the DNA of it is really interesting. I mean, I think what we found is that using glue lams for the floors as opposed to CLT, it's half the price if you're using a stock glue lam product and connecting it in the way we were kind of working together with it. And I think actually very refined and beautiful. I mean, this is CLT. I love CLT, but I think the thing about timber is just, it's not just cross-laminated timber. It's not just glue lam. It's this sort of, it's a way of thinking about building to create great experiences in people's everyday lives and feel like, hey, this is a great experience that if it's sourced from a sustainably managed forest is actually something that could have a positive impact in the world as a whole. And I think that's something, thinking about that story, thinking about how to really tell that story and also and really monitor it. And I think one of the things, the other thing that we're really interested right now in is making forest management more transparent to users, to architects, to owners, to developers, to really sort of see the larger picture, you know? I mean, and I think that's the same thing that I think has happened within the culinary movement in the world, where people are like, hey, what am I eating? Where does it come from? How does that impact, you know, the people that are either growing that food or the animals that are being, in a way, how are they being treated? You know, I think there's something I think there's a desire to get behind the surface of things. And I think that's same desire you're seeing in the culinary movement is kind of shifting into architecture. So I think you're going to see that whole revolution happening. And then I think the other layer that's going on top of that is the equity layer, you know, like where are these things being sourced and how is that being treated? So that's exciting. And Greg, thank you very much for giving the opportunity to sort of chat with people. So I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you. And hopefully we can hook up our new factory and our little manufacturing cluster to your new building when we get that crowdfunded. So I'll be back with you on that.
All for it. Yeah.
All right.
I love building in Portland, you know, it's like, it's great. Love to do it. Take care, Greg.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you for your time.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.